is, I think it could be a very weighty issue. I think when you talk about the most weighty issues, or the issues with the most gravity, or the most serious, or the issues that you have to kind of talk about, like, with put your kittel on or something like that, is this issue. But I also think it could be very interesting. So the issue that we're talking about, as you could tell from the heading, is kind of the various responses that we've had in Jewish literature regarding the idea of suffering. And what's interesting is that this topic was something that was discussed in many, many places in Jewish literature. And we kind of find somewhat differences, like subtle differences in the Jewish response to this issue. And even in this one, I think if I were to classify kind of the different Jewish responses, or traditional Jewish responses in literature, classic Jewish literature to this issue, to the issue of, the way it's commonly called to nowadays is, why do bad things happen to good people? We have about 4 or 5 different responses. And there's some subtleties. So I think it could be very interesting, especially if you guys look at the kind of the source material that we bring. I think it could be a very interesting discussion. But it's always a perilous one, because whenever you talk about suffering, the one thing that's ubiquitous across all of human history and human experience is that people go through challenges, and people have difficulties. And people have pain in their lives, and people know people that have pains. And collectively, as a nation, we know if you look at Jewish history from beginning to end, it's a litany of bad experiences collectively as a nation. So it's a very emotional issue as well. And I don't think that the sources that we're going to be addressing with today really address the emotional issue, the emotional aspects of this question. I think that's for a different discussion, obviously. When Sarah died in Genesis, so the Torah goes out kind of, in detail, talking about how Abraham cried for her and eulogized her. And you think Abraham's the titan of philosophy. He's the most cerebral, the most intellectual. Like, to him, he should be able to understand the death of a loved one intellectually. Yet the response that the Torah provides that Abraham had was one of emotion. Talking about the deceased, eulogizing and crying. Having a mourning period. I think that surely shows that an emotional response to this problem is always appropriate, for sure. Even Abraham. I think, there's no greater example of someone who made tremendous inroads or achievements, advances, innovations in the intellectual realm than Abraham. Abraham was the father of monotheism. Abraham is the father of what we call today as humans, morality, kind of the system of what collective societies across the world kind of live and believe, and that's started by Abraham. Yet Abraham himself, when he was faced with tragedy, he dealt with it emotionally as well. So not to belittle, God forbid, or to not give the proper due to the emotional question of this very important issue. But philosophically, I think there's room to discuss it, on a Sunday night here among friends. So... No. That it was what? Appropriate to discuss it amongst friends.
Oh.
You understood
from... I thought you said... never mind.
What?
We're very tricky group. You got to keep your eyes on us. We're very tricky.
Roll the tape. What did I say?
Let's have a replay. I misheard.
Appropriate. Yeah, I apologize if it wasn't...
Remembered. We're Lashon Hara.
Okay, So let's look at the first source here. So I think that you read the first source. It's from the Talmud in Menachos. The book of Menachos talks about the offerings, the flour offerings that were done in the temple. Not exactly something which is very pertinent to us as Jews today, but that's what the book talks about. But we find this very, very bizarre, very striking, very interesting narrative that happened with Moses as he ascends to heaven. So Moses, obviously, we just read in the Parsha, the Ten Commandments. Moses has this prophecy. He goes up onto the mountain. We just read that in this past week's Parsha. Moses, the last words of the Parsha are Moses was up on the mountain 4 days and 40 nights. This most recent Parsha yesterday that we read. So the Talmud recounts this dialogue that Moses has with the Almighty. And like we said, it's interesting, but I think it provides an insight to obviously the response that we have to this issue, but also to the problem that we're all going to be facing when we try to integrate this response into our consciousness. So what does it say? This is, by the way, I just typed this now in the past hour, so if you see any typos, it's on me. And I just translated it. So
thank you for making it big and bold.
Yes, I know. I remember last time, the only other time I spoke to you, I spoke about it was when Germany was considering to ban circumcision in the Goldberg home. And I had printed some sources that was really small, and someone said, like, no, you can't do it. I said, I maxed it out in one page. I try to... Yes, I have to make it as big as I can while fitting to one page. Okay, so Moses ascended to heaven. He found the Almighty sitting and tying crowns atop letters, it should say. I apologize. As you know, if we open up a Torah scroll, there's seven letters that on top of them it has these little crowns. It looks like these, everyone's familiar with what we're talking about. So Moses asks, who is obstructing your ways? That's which means, like, why do you need to do this? Like, you're the Almighty God, creator of heaven and earth. Why do you have to color or, put in these little chupchik on top of the letters? That's the question he asked him. So God tells him, there's a man who will be in the future after several generations, and his name is Akiva Ben Yosef, famous Rabbi Akiva, who is going to emerge onto the Jewish scene at the first century of the Common Era. So 14 some odd 100 years later, and he is going to derive piles and piles of laws from every tick, from every coats. The word coats, the word I translate as tick. So every little every one of those little crowns that you see on top of a letter, God tells Moses, Rabbi Akiva, this famous Rabbi Akiva that we know, he is going to derive laws. And what those laws are, by the way, we have no idea what those laws are. Like, there's no place across the entire 2,711 pages of the Talmud that says, oh, this law is derived from this little crown on top of this letter. So what those laws are is a big question and debate in the scholarship. So Moses says, okay, you know what? Let me see this guy. So he gets apparated. Moses says, show him to me. He says, go back. So he went back and he sat, and Moses suddenly is transported into the future, and he's sitting in the lecture hall, and Rabbi Akiva is lecturing. And he's sitting at the end of 8 rows. By the way, every single peculiarity that we have with reading the source is discussed by all the commentators. What do you mean 8 rows, and he's sitting at the back, and all these things are discussed at great length. So Moses is transported into the lecture hall of Rabbi Akiva. He's sitting at the end of the 8 rows, and he doesn't know what they're talking about, and he gets all upset. He's like, wait a minute, this is my Torah. This is the Torah of Moses. And Rabbi Akiva's talking, he doesn't understand. And he says that Allah doesn't understand. He says Allah doesn't understand. Until finally, Rabbi Akiva arrived at a certain matter, and his students questioned him, where do you know this law from? So Rabbi Akiva said a law, and he says, what's the source for it? So he responded to them, it's a law from Moses and Mount Sinai. It's a halacha l'Moshe miSinai. It's a law there's no source for it in the Torah. It's just a tradition from Moses. Moses hears that, and he's happy. He's a swash. He's placated. Fine. And he goes back to the Almighty, and he says to him, Master of the world, Ribono Shalom, oh, wow, this is bad. You have a man such as this, and you give the Torah via me? Moses says to him, wait a minute. I'm here up in heaven to receive the Torah. Obviously, the Almighty thought that I was the right guy for the job. And now we see Rabbi Akiva, who's so much more capable than me, and he's saying Torah. I don't even understand what he's talking about. Give the Torah through him. Why are you giving the Torah through me? So what does God tell him? Listen to this response. Silence. Shtok. Hebrew, shtok. You tell kids, if your kids make a too much noise. Shtok kvar, du drei kvar. Shtok. Silence. Don't ask questions. Why? So it was deemed in my mind. And Moses says back to him, Okay, this is really the point that we wanted to get to. Master of the world, you show me his Torah, now show me his reward. I saw the Torah, I saw the great accomplishments in Torah of Rabbi Akiva. He's deriving these piles and piles of laws, fantastic. Okay, what does the reward of Rabbi Akiva look like? He said to him, go back, and he went and he saw that they were flaying his skin with combs. We know that the Emperor Hadrian, while being initially very favorable to the Jews, eventually went on a kind of he set out to disassemble the Jewish people, basically, top to bottom. That's what we have. The Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 of the Common Era was seen by most historians. They interpret that as a response to the Hadrianic persecutions, where they said no study of Torah publicly, no circumcision, no observance of Shabbat or neither laws. So that's why they had the revolt or the rebellion, and they succeeded. Something that was not done in 500 years of the Roman Empire. They succeeded in kicking the Romans out and establishing sovereignty of the land. And today in Israel, they find all the time these coins that were minted by Bar Kokhba during those 3 years where the Jews had sovereignty. Eventually, Hadrian in 135, they overwhelmed the rebellion, and that's the story of Beitar, and they were slaughtering towns, and they went and they kind of eliminated the leadership of the Jewish people. And Rabbi Akiva, who was an old rabbi at the time, they executed him, or they killed him in this really horrible way. They flayed his skin. So Moses asked the Almighty, show me the reward of Rabbi Akiva. And he says, oh, okay, sure, turn around. Turns around, and what does he see? Moses being killed in this horrible way. Sorry, I apologize. Rabbi Akiva dying in this horrible, gruesome death. That's the reward. So what he says back to him, he says, wait a minute. He said back to God, Master, well, this is the Torah and this is the reward? Zu Torah v'zu schara? This is the reward? Doesn't make any sense. So what does God respond to him? Silence. So it was deemed in my mind. Thus, the very first time we have recorded documentation of this question, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, I guess you have Job before that. Let's hold it. Let's put that. Well, Job was after that, but it was recorded before that. Talmud, but the Talmud records this question that Moses asked the Almighty many years before the Talmud was written, and it says the question: Rabbi Akiva, who's obviously a righteous person, and really bad things are happening to him, and that's the first time. What's the answer? Be quiet. Don't ask questions. This is what I think. This is me talking. God says to Moses, don't ask questions. This is the way I do things. So it was deemed in my mind. That's what I think. It's a little disappointing. No, what do you guys think? It's there's a lot of questions here. Like, first of all,
well, he knew my mother because my mother always used to say, because I said so.
Everybody. Your parents not this is part of the Talmud.
That's right.
Here.
That's right.
So who actually wrote this section and from whence did they get it?
Yes, so it was written, that was canonized. Talmud's canonized at the year 500 of the Common Era. So admittedly, much after the events. So it's not historical. Agreed. No one will argue that it is historical. Yet the tradition was that this actually
This
happened.
was a story that passed down.
Yes, this part was part of the collective.
It's not a
it's equivalent. It's part of the collective oral Torah. Yeah. So as to the historicity, it's a different discussion. But for sure, the perspective is the Jewish perspective, obviously, according to Talmud. And I'm saying there's a few major questions here. I think we could agree. Anyone has any answers?
Well, I mean, one of the things is that there shouldn't be an expectation for doing good or for being right or for being able to teach. You don't expect a reward. As part of what goes wrong is I do something right and then you reward me. I do something because of what I do.
But he wasn't being punished.
Well, Akiva was. He said, show me his reward.
But in terms of when you're saying expect a reward, who do you expect it from?
Well, Moses is saying to God, what was his reward? So I'm saying, the lesson, what was the lesson he was teaching Moses?
So,
Is what I'm
Judy,
saying.
what you're trying to say is that
Yes, tell me what I'm saying.
is that if I understand what you're saying is that God's basically telling Moses it's the wrong question to ask because it's out for altruistic reasons. He was kind of like sending him away. He says, "Don't ask him silly questions." And in fact, I'm not going to show you his reward at all. I'm going to show you his punishment. I think that's a legitimate answer. I think so. We have a famous Mishnah in the chapters of the Fathers. Don't be like servants who serve the master contingent upon receiving reward. Rather, you should always do it altruistically. You should serve the master without the intention of receiving reward. Interestingly, the text that Maimonides has of that Mishnah, the Rambam, he switches one word. Instead of saying shelo almanach, he says almanach shelo. The difference being is that the commonly accepted text of that Mishnah reads, rather you should be like servants who serve the master without intention of receiving reward. That's how the commonly accepted text. Maimonides switches it around. He says you should be like servants who serve the master with intention to not receive reward. It's like you don't want it. It's not like but yes, I think that's a very interesting idea to think about that. That maybe God's kind of like almost toying with Moses by telling him, no, this is not the right question. You ask for his reward, I'll show you his punishment. Where's the reward? Don't ask questions. You're missing the whole boat. I like that.
Why did Akiva? Why was he punished?
That's a good question. Why was Rabbi Akiva punished, or was he punished? I'm saying, I think there's a problem. I think just in the the continuity here. The question. I'll give you a second. Sorry. The question that was asked by Moses to God, it says, "You showed me his Torah, show me his reward." What does he get? What does he show? The punishment. So there's one question: is why does Rabbi Akiva get punished? Another question is, how is this an answer to the question? Moses asked, "Show me the reward." Being flayed, his skin being flayed. That's reward. That's punishment. It doesn't seem like you're answering the question. So there's two questions there. What kind of answer is it? Be quiet, don't ask questions. This is the way I think. What kind of answer is that? Moses is asking a legitimate question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Very legitimate question.
Dying on people's Hashem.
So
That has a whole different symbolism and meaning and strength.
okay, so maybe that is a reward. Is that a reward? Maybe.
How many people can do that?
It's true. We all know about him. There are many, many other rabbis that were wonderful men and teachers. We don't know their names.
So
I'm not saying that's a reward.
I would like to say, on the other hand, I don't agree with this at all. Because what was Rabbi Akiva doing? He was doing what it says in the Shema. And if
That's
you
right.
follow all my laws and be honest with your God and everything, you will be granted A, B, C, and D. And then if you don't, you'll be punished. Well, Rabbi Akiva was doing all the things. So God had made this promise to the Jews that I will reward you with good and you'll have plenty and not to worry. And I think he went back
that seems like a very legitimate question. And what's interesting?
Or the Olam Haba.
Is he speaking
for the
dirty?
year to come.
Is he what?
He's speaking dirty. How come he's saying everything
In Hebrew.
Because that's the reward
But
of the Olam Haba.
what kind of example does that give to the Jews for them? Oh, you should really follow.
Now, what's actually interesting about that is that there's one source that was left off, and that is the actual source that there's a whole page and a half in the Talmud that talks about Rabbi Akiva, kind of his humble beginnings and how what's going on, 24,000 students, all the story of him and his father-in-law and his wife, and all those stories, and then it tells us the story of his martyrdom. And it seems like at the time he was very delighted, and the students asked him, like, "Why are you so happy? You're being tortured." And he says to them, because I said the Shema, right? B'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha, and you have to love God with all your soul. And the Mishnah tells us what do you mean with all your soul? You have to love God even if God takes away your soul. And Rabbi Akiva says to his students, my whole life I've been saying this, and I never had the opportunity to actually love God with all my soul. Now that I'm being killed al Kiddush Hashem. I'm being killed, because of what I was doing for the sake of heaven. Now I can be happy. So yes, it
Was this also the historical time when there was so much martyrdom that the rabbis said, we're going to cut back reasons why you cannot be a martyr for these things? You could be a martyr for 2 or 3 things. Because so many people were martyring themselves. And
what's actually interesting is that the Talmud is
historically.
the Talmud. Well, yes, it was a time of heightened. It was a time of what's called a shmad. Shmad is a time where the rights of the Jews to live and peacefully and to practice as Jews was being threatened. And what's actually interesting is the Talmud in Sanhedrin, where it talks about Kiddush Hashem. It's on 74b, 8 to b, where it turns the page, and it talks about in a time of shmad, then the responsibilities of martyrdom are raised, because at a time where the status of the Jewish people to continue and to flourish as Jews is in question because of the rules and the edicts and the decrees of their host nation. Therefore, the responsibility of martyrdom goes up.
To become more martyred or to not be martyred?
Yes, more. That's what it says. Not to budge, so to speak.
What is the word
Shmad, S-H-M-A-D. Shmad is a term for when the Jewish people are their rights to live as Jews are being infringed upon. Well, yes, but when it's heightened, actually the term Shmad is actually specifically talked about in context of the Hadrianic persecutions in the year 135 to 130. I think he died at 136. Thankfully, Hadrian died because he was, out of all of the villains in Jewish history, the Emperor Hadrian was one of the worst. Probably worse than Titus, and worse than even the Antiochus, and worse than Pompey. Worse than them all was Hadrian. So thankfully he died, and his decrees were annulled. But that was a time of Shmad, and thus we do have a lot of episodes of martyrdom.
I may know this in the back of my mind. Is there a concept within Judaism of taking on punishment for oneself in order to prevent others from having
Like self-flagellation,
No, not that, but like saying, I'll be the martyr, or if you take me and then
We have one in Scripture, right? What does it say? It says that Judah tries to reason with his father. Yeah, that send Benjamin with me, and then if I don't bring him back, I guarantee kind of like to accept the. So yes, there is this thing. I don't know exactly where it's spelled out for us. How do we actually practice it? But I think that idea is like where they have like this spiritual bank where you could kind of allocate.
Right. I'm just wondering, like with Rabbi Akiva, maybe he was thinking, this is happening to me, and sort of thank God it's happening to me, because for now, the others will be
Yeah, we do have that.
And that's and he had been told stop teaching, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
He said,
He famously said, "Well, a Jew without Torah is like a fish out of water." He compared the Jews to fish.
it's basically he knew this was going to happen.
Oh, it seems like yes. Yes, it seems like.
So how is martyrdom received in Judaism?
Well,
I don't know.
How is martyrdom received?
Yeah, is that a noble thing?
Well, it seems like you open up the Maimonides in the very first section that he talks about kind of the principles of Judaism, and he says that someone who dies al Kiddush Hashem, who's a martyrdom, who dies for the sake of heaven, so to speak, dies because they're Jewish, whether that means that they were, God forbid, in the Holocaust, or they were in the synagogue in Copenhagen yesterday, or anytime someone's life was taken away because of God, so to speak, because they're God's people, because they fulfill God's work. There's no one who's greater than them. That's what Maimonides quotes.
I'm thinking in terms of also the terrorists.
Oh yeah. So I think it transcends the reason why. But we've been the subject of a lot of persecution and marginalization, if you will, over the centuries. And in the Jewish Weltanschauung, nothing overrides, nothing supersedes, nothing is greater in the status of those martyrs.
But they didn't intend to be.
Oh no,
So
of course
they're
not.
different.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, oh yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah, we don't believe in suicide. If that was the question, I didn't understand the question.
No, but it's an honor in the
Yeah, but-
Muslim terrorists and radicals. That's an honor to go.
But no, we don't do
Taking
it
out
for the honor.
Well, I don't think we choose to do it. I think
Yes.
it's done to us
Right.
because we are doing what we're instructed to do, keeping the faith or honoring the Torah. So we are, in a sense, the victim. We are not self-anointing.
Yeah, we don't believe in putting yourself into a perilous situation, bringing that upon yourself. Another example, as to I just thought of where punishment in one area will obviate or prevent punishment in different areas. Where we say that the Almighty destroyed the temple, and we say, "Blessed is he that he let his fury go on eitzim vavanim, on stones and wood, so to speak. That the Almighty doesn't let his wrath out upon us, rather let him destroy the temple. That's a much better thing, where the anger that should have been directed and channeled towards us was instead directed at the temple, at the edifice, at the physical temple, and not the eternal nation. Either way, we have a question that was posed by Moses to the Almighty. Just, to review what our takeaways here. Question: where is the reward of Rabbi Akiva? Answer: here's him being punished. Obviously, there's a problem for us.
The reward was he knew he did the right thing.
Yeah, so we're going to have.
That was his. There was no external reward. It was an internal.
Okay, but we're gonna have to reconcile this problem where the question was posed: where's the reward of Rabbi Akiva? And the answer that we saw was the imagery of Rabbi Akiva being punished. That's question number one. And question number two is, what kind of answer is it when Moses persists and says, "This is the Torah, this is the reward. Bad things happen to good people," and then the answer is,
Can't be explained.
yeah, be quiet. Exactly, be
Not
quiet.
inscrutable, we can't understand it. That's the age-old.
Okay, that
just doesn't work in this century.
Yeah, and I think we'll have a very hard time accepting that. It's what kind of answer is that? It seems like we're dodging. It seems like we're dodging a very important issue, like we're trying to hide behind the fence or brush it under the rug. Okay, those are our two problems. We good? That's good. Let's move on to source number two.
Good but not happy.
No.
That was the purpose. Yeah.
Source number two presents another time that our very own Moses asked God the same question. And of course, we have to say to ourselves, wait a minute, Moses, you don't remember that you asked God the same question? And this is only, we'll see historically, this is 40 days later. Right? The first source was when Moses went up to heaven. Second source is in Exodus 33. That's after the episode of the golden calf. So that's 40 days later. What does it say? Rabbi Yochanan said the name of Rabbi Yossi. This is an abridged version. I cut out a little bit. I just, for the sake of honesty, I did take a little bit out of this source. Rabbi Yochanan says the name of Rabbi Yossi. 3 things Moses asked from the Almighty and he gave them. It means there's 3 questions that Moses had and the Almighty responded. And one of them is he asked to know the ways of God. And God gave him. God responded. As what's that? As Scripture states, inform me of your ways. Moses says, Hode'eni nos darkecha, let me know your ways. What did he ask? Moses said to God, why is it that there is a righteous person and it is good for him, a righteous person and it is bad for him? A wicked person and it is good for him, a wicked person and it is bad for him. So Moses here expands the question really to 4 different scenarios. A righteous person is good for them. You see some people that they're righteous and it's good for them. A righteous person is bad for them. That's really the question he asked earlier. Bad things happen to good people. But then he flips it to the other side, the converse side. A wicked person and it's good for them, and a wicked person is bad for them. Moses seems to be asking God the same question that he asked him a little bit earlier. And now he gets a response. God doesn't tell him, quiet, don't ask questions. And now God gives him a response. And he seems what's the response? So God responded, a righteous person and it's good for him. That's a completely righteous person. A righteous person and it's bad for him. That's a partially righteous person. A wicked person and it's good for him. It's a partially wicked person. A wicked person is bad for him. A completely, that should say wicked. I told you guys I did not proofread this. I apologize. Hastily put together. No. That's a completely wicked person. I apologize for that.
That's actually more interesting.
Well, basically, it's all in the time. A good person can be good at one time, and then in one era, and then it's just kind of like our Supreme Court that they rule one way, and then 30 years later they'll rule just the opposite.
Well, that's the Supreme Court.
But this is the same thing.
We don't know about.
Or about Moses, or about God's perspective on this issue.
The question I have is, how can the writers know what God's answer is?
Well, they have a tradition. Remember, the idea of Judaism today is a non-profit organization. But for many,
Something about that.
but for many years, we had prophets, and the prophets,
So this is sort of a translation of some prophets.
Well, this would be. Remember, these are both dialogues that Moses had.
Is this in the Torah? This is actually.
This is in the Talmud.
This is the Talmud.
Yeah.
Exodus 33.
Well, the Talmud gives the insight, as the oral Torah is going to do. It gives insight into the written Torah. So when it says, "Teach me your ways," the Talmud gives you actually what that actually means. It kind of is the teacher's guide to the to what it says in Scripture. So, we have.
Denying that good things happen. Bad things happen.
It's their own fault.
It says they're not 100%.
Yeah, but dual personality. Some days are good, some
But
days
no
are
one can be completely righteous.
Oh,
So you're setting up for nothing else.
Yeah, there are. It's like, 67 or 37, right?
36. Lamed Vav.
well, actually, if you look at source, the third source.
Moses and the gang.
The other source talks about Rabbi Eliezer. Who was Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi was the famous. He was the probably contemporary of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He lived throughout the temple being destroyed, so the first century. But he was famous for many reasons. But he was the primary teacher of Rabbi Akiva. But additionally, the famous episode of Rabbi Eliezer, where he was banished and he was excommunicated, happened to him. There was a famous episode, like one of the tragic episodes in Jewish history. At the year 80 in Yavne, we know that the center of Jewish leadership moved from Jerusalem to Yavne. That's where they reestablished the Sanhedrin, and all the rabbis went. So in Yavne, it was actually a little bit after the full convention of Yavne. There was a debate as to the ritual purity of a certain oven. You know the story? What was the story of the oven? Tano Shalachnai. And basically, Rabbi Eliezer believed that this oven was pure, and never thought it was not pure, and he refused to budge on his position, and they said, "You're not agreeing to the majority position, you're out," and they excommunicated basically, and that means that when people came to visit, they'd sit at least 4 cubits away, so 8 feet away, and many times in the Talmud, when the Talmud recounts the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, it says he's a shamuti. We don't listen to him. We don't ever go with his opinion because he was excommunicated, despite the fact that he was the preeminent.
What's the 4 cubits?
Yes, well, because he was excommunicated, there are various laws regarding when someone gets excommunicated from the community, pending, obviously, he had the option to give in, but he refused to his last day. So one of the laws is that if someone's excommunicated, you can't sit next to them. You can't sit and talk to them like you and I. It's a minimum of 4 cubits, amos.
What's
Which
that
is
about?
a cubit is about 62 centimeters. Right? The
So you
length
can
of an
be
arm.
pretty close.
So yeah, it's about 8 feet or 7 feet or whatever. Yes. So
And what
Is this in this story? Is this where Rabbi Eliezer has certain powers and is able to?
that's the story. The story goes is that Rabbi Eliezer announced, if I'm right, he did 4 things. If I'm right, let the waters of the river start heading in the opposite direction. And the water started heading in the opposite direction, and the rabbi said, doesn't matter, the majority is against you, we don't care. You're not going to prove it to us. He's like, if I'm right, let this tree uproot itself and plant itself 100 amos, 100 cubits away. And suddenly the tree uproots itself, and it moves 100 amos away, and people say, the rabbi says, it doesn't matter, majority rules, doesn't matter that you have all this, you're able to do this, doesn't prove anything. The third thing that happened was that Rabbi Eliezer declared, if I'm right, let the walls of the Beis Medrash cave in. And suddenly the walls started caving in, and they remained like that, basically caved in just in perpetuity. And lastly, he said, if I'm right, let there be a prophetic voice that announces. Suddenly everybody hears this booming prophetic voice. And what do the rabbis say? Lo b'shamayim the Torah is not in heavens. It doesn't matter. All your proofs are nothing. We go with majority. Akrab lahatos. If you don't agree, you're excommunicated. And he says, I don't agree, and he excommunicated. That's those are the stories. It's in Bav Metzia 59b. Very long discussion. Now, the problem, what made it even naughtier, this story, was that Rabbi Eliezer was the brother-in-law of Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel was the person who signed off on this excommunication. He was they were brothers-in-law. Like Rabbi Eliezer married Rabbi Gamliel's sister. Yet he, because he felt the need, especially after the temple was destroyed and after the weakening of the central authority of the Jewish people, he felt the need that there has to be uniformity. If the rabbis all agree, majority agrees one way, it doesn't matter. Rabbi Eliezer is the greatest scholar, and he does all these proofs, and he's my brother-in-law. Doesn't matter. He's out. Kind of, he put his foot down. Rabbi Gamliel did. So that's Rabbi Eliezer. So he's about to die here. So Eliezer is sick, and his students came to visit him. So even though he was excommunicated, the Talmud elsewhere says when they came to visit him, they sat 4 cubits away. So they basically they're sitting far away from him to demonstrate that they can, even though he's on his deathbed, really. So the students came to visit him. Rabbi Eliezer says there is a great fear in the world. Rabbi Eliezer is talking about his own personal pain and how much he was suffering as he was in his final illness, and he said that there's this great fury. The Almighty is just letting him have it. So all the students that came there, they started to cry, and Rabbi Akiva started laughing, which, by the way, is a theme. Several times at the Talmud, we see a bunch of people crying, Rabbi Akiva laughing. And Rabbi Akiva always had this optimistic view. He was always able to see the positive. Elsewhere, the Talmud tells that Rabbi Akiva and a bunch of his colleagues were walking after the temple was destroyed, and they see like animals roaming Temple Mount. Everyone starts crying, and he starts laughing. They say to him, why are you laughing? He says, then why are you crying? So he says, well, what are you crying? This is the temple. This is the place where Solomon built this temple. This was the center point, the epicenter of Jewish life for 800 years. And all this in ruins, totally raised with a Z. How can we not cry? So he says to them, well, that's why I'm laughing. Because this is the fulfillment of a prophecy. He brought you, there's 2 prophecies. And the prophecy says the temple will be destroyed, and then it'll be rebuilt. So he says, if you don't see it being destroyed and being in ruins, you would think maybe the other prophecy would not be fulfilled as well. Thus, the evidence of the temple being ruins, that gives me comfort because I know that the other prophecy will be fulfilled as well, that it will once again be flourishing. Jerusalem will once again be robustly replete with Jews and Jewish vibrancy. That's a story elsewhere. Yes, always the positive. So this is another example, even though that particular story is brought down to the end of Menachos, the book of Menachos. This is in Sanhedrin. So here it says, they see their teacher suffering, and they all start crying, or Akiva starts laughing. So he said. So they said to him, "No, Rabbi Eliezer is sick. Rabbi Akiva is one of his disciples, one of his students, and there's other students as well. Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Joshua, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. All those other students came to visit.
All those guys in the Haggadah.
Yeah, exactly. These are the same people. These are the names that are ubiquitous across all of Mishnah and Talmud. So what happened here? So they're all crying and he's laughing. So they say, well, wait a minute, why are you laughing? So he says to them, why are you crying? He says, how can we not cry? We see a Torah scroll like our venerated teacher, Rabbi Eliezer, is in pain. How can we not cry? So he says to them, this is why I'm laughing. The same exact reason. Why? For all the time that I saw our teacher's wine not ferment, his flax not smitten, or smote, or whatever, his oil not spoil, I said, perhaps, God forbid, our teacher received his reward in this world. And now I see him in pain, I'm happy. Basically, once again, Rabbi Akiva coming and seeing the optimistic side of things. And he said Rabbi Eliezer had everything going for him. Everything was going well for him. His wine and his flax, and everything was going well for him. And I was worried he had no punishment in the world. Never received any. He never had a bad day. Now that I see he got punished, I know that his reward is safe for the world to come. So this basically, I think, is a sources 2 and 3 complement each other very well. And I think this would be probably the classical Jewish response to the question, why do bad things happen to good people? The answer is, like it says in source number 2, because they're only they're not completely righteous. Everyone has, as we know, Ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yechel. There's no righteous person in the world who does good and does not sin. Thus, everyone has, even the most righteous of people, has a little bit of sin, and that sin has to be accounted for. Therefore, they have to receive their punishment, or they're accounting for it.
That sounds very much like a Christian philosophy.
Well, maybe they borrowed it from us. But the idea of reward and punishment is an idea that you basically have to believe if you believe in God. Because by definition, if you believe in God, you believe that God has a plan, and God did this all for a reason. So by definition, you're saying that our actions and what we do matters. If there's no reward or punishment, and if Hitler and Mother Teresa are they're in the same place, well then what does life matter? It doesn't really matter, irrespective of what you do, So by definition, we all accept the idea of reward and punishment, that our actions have meaning to them. But this, I think, would be the classical Jewish response to this question, that even the most righteous of people has a little bit of sin.
So does that mean that Rabbi Akiva was flayed because he had a little sin?
Okay, so we'll bring it full circle. This is exactly that insight. I think we'll bring it totally full circle. So like we said, this is, I think, is creeping slowly into the emotional problem a bit. But yes, if we were to encapsulate from these sources the response to this problem, that's probably the simplest way we would answer it. That even the most righteous has something that they need to atone for, and it's that you have the choice. Do you want it in this world? Do you want it in the next world? And we know that the exchange rate, it's like, would you trade $100 for 100 pesos? I don't even know what the exchange rate is, or rubles. No, I don't know what it is, but I somehow assume that the dollar is worth more than the pesos. Can we safely assume that?
Yeah.
Let's assume that. Okay. So, do you want to get punished in dollars or in pesos? You want to fine of 100 pesos or $100? What do you rather, Richard?
100
Of course, exactly. Thus, or rubles or whatever currency. Thus, that I think would explain it. That if you're going to anyhow receive your share for your misdeeds, let it be in this world where it's much simpler. It's the physical body, it's not eternal, it's in pesos. I'll take the fine in pesos. Okay, but this is not even what I wanted to talk about. What happened with Moses? Forget about this whole rationale. What happened with Moses? Moses asked the question, and God tells him, no answer for you. Quiet, silence is the way I work. 40 days later, Moses asks the same question, gets an answer. Well, what's going on over here? What is going on over here? How? First of all, on Moses' part, why is Moses asking the question again? Why is Moses asking the same question again? Number one. Number two, why is there a different answer? What's going on? It's only 40 days had passed from when Moses goes up to the heaven, to the mountain, and has the first dialogue in source number
Because
one.
Moses' second question was more in the abstract. God can handle that. But to really focus on Rabbi Akiva, and the first one, God was saying, maybe I messed up there. He wasn't that bad of a guy, and yet he got treated pretty shallow.
Okay, I think that's
So God made a
That's-
mistake, Richie. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
no, or
Suffer
the
for that.
no, or the what he's trying to say is that the imagery or the tangibility, so to speak, of an episode of Rabbi Akiva is much harder to explain than bad people, good people, kind of like.
This thing about the world to come, I think it's Psalm 48, it's in the daily Psalm, where it says, blessed is the guy that God chastises, the man that God chastises, because he will be more prepared for the world to come. And we say that in the daily Psalm.
Mhm.
And so that if you get a little bit of punishment because you were righteous most of the time, and wicked or sinful, just a small piece of the time, you get that correction by God, and then you're fully ready for the world.
But Moses wasn't able to handle it, and I think I look around the room and I see skeptics everywhere, and it's like I want to just this is what I wanted to reach. This is exactly what I wanted to reach: the skepticism. I believe that the reason why God told Moses, quiet, this is the way I think, is because even Moses, even the great Moses, the prophet who took us out of Egypt and did the plagues and split the sea, the whole deal, Moses, to really understand this, to be at peace, to have internal harmony with the idea of our physical punishment being a good thing, Moses can't handle it. This is the way God thinks. If you look at God's perspective, makes sense. This is the way I think. So has my intelligence deemed. Moses, quiet, don't ask questions. You can't understand it. I think the skepticism that we all have here today, hearing this response, Moses shared it as well. Because for us, as humans, we're all humans, for us, we have such a geocentric, so to speak, perspective on life. We're so physical. That's what's real to us. Even if we believe in the spiritual, we believe in God, we believe it all. It's never going to be as real to us as the physical world. Thus, God tells Moses, listen, for you, this is not the right answer for you. It's not going to satisfy you. This is the way I think. Right? In my mind, in God's mind, when I ask the question, where's Rabbi Akiva's reward? The answer is him being punished. That's the way God sees it. Right? This is the reward. Why? Because there's nothing greater for a person than to have their punishment in this world. But where's the reward? This you can't understand. This is beyond, even Moses beyond you. Now, what happens to Moses in the interim? What happens over the next 40 days? He's up in heaven for 40 days. He comes down, he sees the people doing the sin of the golden calf. God says, I'm going to destroy them. He intercedes on their behalf. He comes down again, and his face is shining like the sun. The face of Moses like the face of the sun. That people see him, they freak out. He has to wear a mask the rest of his life. What happens? We know this, the idea of sun, just as an aside, you know what? Yes. This is in Exodus. It says it clearly. He wore a mask the entire time. He only took it off when he went into the Ohel Moed. Because his face was shining. It says that people weren't able to see him. People weren't able to look at him. We'll read it in a few weeks in the Parsha. People weren't able to look at him. Right? Moses, during the interim, had... Now, what does it mean, sun? What face of Moses, the face of the sun? We know that the sun is one of the things that is me'ein olam haba. Something there's a few things, 3 things that are a measure of the world to come in this world. That's the sun. Why? Try look at the sun. Anyone here tried that? Anyone here did the sun stare? You can't do it. Why? Because it's beyond us. Right? Our soul, right, in a soulful world, it's beyond us. Moses, in that time, he upped his game, so to speak. He became someone who didn't have the physical inhibitors. Thus, he says, God, I want to ask you the same question I asked you 40 days ago. 40 days ago, I asked you the question. You said, this is not for you. You don't understand it. You're still physical. Right? Now, Moses is like, wait a minute. My face is shining. I have this. I'm playing what you're playing Chama. I right now have shedded my physicality. I want to ask the question again. Now, maybe you give me a real answer. God says, now you could understand it. This is something that now we could talk. And he gives him the answer. But beforehand, no, this is not for you. Even Moses. So I think that, the skepticism that we have, we can feel. Well, what it says is that Moses, when he came back down, he had achieved a equilibrium where his physicality was no longer hindering his soul. So basically, it's like as if he had a soul that wasn't an untethered soul, or a soul that didn't have the obstruction of a body. We have a soul, but it's so deep within us and so covered up. It's so muffled. The effect of the soul is so muffled by our body that it doesn't shine forth. Moses was able, during the interim. Thus he says, now I can understand it. God says, you know what? Now the spiritual centric perspective will indeed make sense to you. But I think we can find tremendous comfort. You go ahead.
It just reminded me of, someone who doesn't get, who's righteous, doesn't get the word, wasn't 100% righteous, and yet it seems to me the travesty is everything that Moses did, but Moses couldn't go into the land of Egypt because he was not completely righteous. He had a
That's right. That's right.
And so, I'm saying, every time I get this, it's, come on, what do you got to do? But here's the person who wasn't 100% righteous. Therefore, it doesn't.
Yeah, and I out of source number 3, out of source number 3, there was another little bit where it said, where Rabbi Akiva told Rabbi Eliezer, and he quoted the verse, "Ein tzadik ba'aretz she'as tovelech." There's no righteous person, no completely righteous person, thus justifying, so to speak, the punishment of Rabbi Eliezer. But yes, to me this was fascinating. To me, when I found this, I found, wait a minute, you have 2 narratives of a question Moses asked the Almighty. 2 narratives, same question, different answers. What's going on? And both of them, we get like it's time stamped. We have a time stamp when this dialogue happened. Right? Number 1, he asked when he went up to heaven, and there he says, "Shtok kach al b'chol, don't ask questions, silence." Only a few weeks later, he gets a full-fledged response.
But that's a very interesting, dichotomy. But to me, that's not the main question. So God told Moses one thing one time, one the next, because Moses could understand better. The main thing is we're all trying to grapple with is why do good people suffer? And it seems like the answer is because 2 things, maybe. Because nobody's fully good. Number 1. Number 2, it's better to suffer now than in the world to come.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, we understand it. We understand it. Do we? Yeah, we're skeptical about it. We don't like it. It's hard for us to be at peace with it.
Well, because even with God's answer that, there's however he went through the 4 things, good, bad, partial good, partial bad, whatever it is. I mean, because we look at people in this world and we don't judge it the same way. Why did this person who wasn't perfect but is really a good person, why is that person suffering? And somebody who's, in our view, probably collective view, mostly not a good person, they're not suffering.
Mm-hmm. Right, and right. But according to this, the way to unlock this problem is that there's going to be a final accounting. When we're not done, we don't see the whole picture.
So you have to really put faith in the world to come to.
No, but it's not even that. It's not. I think it's more simplistic than that. Once you accept the idea of a just God, we don't have this villainous God. We don't have the good and the bad, right? We accept this idea. Therefore, we have a problem. Wait a minute. How do you have a just God, yet all we see, or not all we see, but a lot of what we see is injustice? That's a question I think anyone who accepts the notion of God is going to be faced at some point. If we accept the idea of God being just. And remember, that's the Jewish God. You look, all the prayers we say during Yom Kippur, that God's just, yet we see injustice. So that is a major problem. and we have to grapple with it. There's no way around it. But there's one response which I think some people probably feel more comforted going this avenue by saying, well, God wasn't there. God kind of doesn't have the full reins. That's one response. What you're doing is saying, well, I see the full picture, and God's handcuffed, so to speak. Or you say, I don't see the full picture, and God has full control. Those are basically the only two ways that you could really reconcile this problem. It seems like from the Talmud that the response that they had was that yes, God is in complete control, but we don't see everything. We don't see the final accounting. We don't see anything beyond our now purview. And according to the Talmud, when you ask God, where is Rabbi Akiva's reward? You see his punishment. That's his reward. Because there's no greater reward than to have your punishment in this world. Is that something we're comfortable with? Is that something we feel good about? No. It's very hard for us to accept that. And that's okay, And the Talmud tells us, you know what? When Moses tried to understand that, he said, no, this is not the way you can understand that. Right? This is the way I think. This is the way God thinks. If you had God's perspective, it would make sense to you. We don't have it. We'll never be at ease with the idea. It'll never feel good to accept that. We can understand it, So we have to, that's where the tension is going to be, trying to understand the issue, yet not being able to feel good about it.
Where does the concept of, free choice, choose good or choose evil, come into this, where, God is giving people free choice? It's not a question of, God's got a better plan. The plan was, every time we look back, we keep saying, okay, well, this was God's plan, and this was God's plan. But at the end, you've got some pretty miserable people who have hurt some very innocent people because they chose evil. Yeah.
Okay, so this is, maybe I have to be invited back.
Well, this is
I have to call Wonderland to tell him sorry. I was invited back. Judy invited me back.
I want to hop into children.
Listen, these are all very, very good questions. And now I do have, I'm saying that's a good question. I'll just tell you a story that maybe could provide some insight. My grandfather, of blessed memory, was a kind of a very famous and influential rabbi in Israel. But he wasn't from Israel. He grew up in Berlin. Born in 1914 in Berlin, and grew up in a family where kind of the Torah values and the Torah virtues weren't necessarily the most important thing. Eventually, crazy stories how he ended up in yeshiva. I actually just over the weekend I was reading some of like his kind of hidden biographies or autobiography, some of his own personal writings that he had written. He writes the story. He always wanted to go to yeshiva, but his father didn't let him. Eventually, he met some guy who tried to convince him to go. It's just quick to tell the story. He met someone who tried to convince him to go to yeshiva in Poland. Now, for us, like we think of Europe, well, Germany, Poland. For someone who grew up in Berlin, whose father was a professor who spoke 12 languages, not quite 27, but 12, right? And to someone like that, to go to Poland is like your kid deciding, I want to go to, I don't know.
Go to Conroe.
Yeah. Well, not even Conroe. Like
Vacation in Conroe.
Yeah. Or let's just go to the other end of the world. So he decided to write a letter. He decided to write a letter to his father. I'll ask him. He'll say no way, for sure not. He writes a letter. His father responds: go to Poland, go to Mir, go to yeshiva. And to him, he was shocked when he got that response. Like his father, like anything he knew about his father would like completely preclude him from positively responding. Anyhow, so later on, he found out that his father had a little superstitious, and he was on vacation in Rome, and he had asked a fortune teller. He had a relationship with this person who had this sixth sense.
That's a violation right there.
Well, it's his father. Don't blame me. Yeah. So his father had asked this person in Germany before he left on this trip. He was going on this cruise to Italy. he asked him, "Give me what's going to be in this trip." The guy told him, "Your son is going to send you a letter with a very bizarre request. Grant his request. And then he's in Italy. He gets a letter from my grandfather. Can I go to the Mir Yeshiva? I go to Yeshiva." And then he says, "Here's the letter," and he let her go to Yeshiva. So he ended up Yeshiva, and that's the only.
Nancy Reagan.
Huh?
He knew Nancy Reagan.
Yeah. Well.
She lives by astrology.
Well, that's his father, my grandfather's father. Eventually, that's the only way he ended up in Sweden throughout the war and made it to Israel in 1946. Which to us, to get to Israel from 45 to 48 was very difficult. But they managed to get in there, and he opened the yeshiva, and he wrote many books. Very influential, rabbi in Israel. Anyhow, so he died. And shortly, his name was Shlomo. I have a son named Shlomo, named after him. And I have a cousin. And my cousin had a baby boy, like 6 months after, our esteemed grandfather died. So what do you name your boy when you're Shlomo? He named him Shlomo. And 3 months later, the child died of crib death. And he was obviously devastated. And my uncle in New York, this was in Israel, my uncle in New York wrote him a letter, and he wrote in the letter that what happened was that the soul of our esteemed grandfather, it was a perfect soul. It's a wonderful character, read about him. But he had one flaw, and that flaw, that hole, was the fact that he wasn't born into a wholesome family or a family that believed in the virtues of Torah as number one ideal. That was lacking. Therefore, the soul had to come back round, and your baby was the same soul. And once he fulfilled, that's the soul of the family, same name Shlomo. But once he fulfilled his, he kind of, that's it. He didn't need to be there anymore, and he went back. That's what my uncle wrote. Well, that's what he wrote to try to comfort him.
So, Rabbi, it's good that
Okay.
you had the second Shlomo.
God, yes. Yes. Well, that's what he wrote. I don't know if it's true or not. All I know is that to them it was comforting. The perspective of this was not for nothing. Whatever. I don't know what to say. I don't. Yeah, I don't know if we have any. This is a question, and it will remain a question. Well, the question is it more comforting than the thought of, that's the thing.
It wasn't random.
Yeah, it wasn't random. That's what she.
The most is, I think, is essentially random. The randomness.
Mm-hmm.
That's really at the bottom of everything.
I would think so. Like, I don't know. It's funny. I heard this from my uncle, from actually my aunt. She told me that's weird. I don't know where he had the gumption to write that. He wrote them a letter because he was in New York and they're in Jerusalem. But to me, it's a perspective, and whether or not it was comforting, who knows?
But I think that sometimes, people who are in the midst of grief, and I'll tell you, there's two things. One is who didn't come to see them and say something, and the second thing is it's something odd that they say that hits them or they read that is very comforting.
Mm-hmm.
And someone else looks at it and says, what are you talking about? But there are things that hit people, and that must have felt like, I named him after the grandfather, and that's, or this is what I. Yeah. No. We wouldn't want to do to our own child, but you're talking about grieving, and grieving is a different process. You're talking about before a death, and I'm talking about after. And how do you handle grief? And I don't think we know. Some things can be, some things can, for whatever reason, you don't know what the person says, but that moves you. I just think that for your cousin?
Yes,
it was,
cousin. I hope so. I have to follow up.
But it certainly helped your uncle.
I'd be very curious.
But it helped your uncle.
Because
Doc, what would Frankel say about this?
Oh, good.
You know, when you, the worst thing is to see no purpose in anything. That's the worst.
What's the word?
Amorphous, just no purpose in anything. If you have a child, and the child is seen as an angel, because an angel only has one purpose. Once that purpose is done, the angel disappears. This is Jewish law or Jewish tradition.
What's the purpose?
An angel is usually assigned one purpose. It can happen in a second, it can happen in a century. And when that purpose is completed, the angel goes back to the source.
No, like when a bell rings 3 times, you get
Well, under an eagle. All right, but if you have a baby that dies, and you get a feeling there's no purpose, there's no reason, there's nothing, it's amorphous. That is the most discomforting. When you say, well, it's fulfilled. There's a soul that had something lacking, which is the soul of a great person that influences generations by virtue of teachings and so on. And in a sense, it completed what was missing, and so my child provided something to close the circle. Even that's not what you want. It's painful.
But it's still comforting.
It's mourning, but it has a certain comforting tone to it, rather than this is absolutely no reason and no purpose, and we're lost it.
But that child is born with a pure heart. How can it take on the problems or the misdeeds of previous generations? That's not.
Well, what he's saying is it wasn't about misdeeds. It was about completing the circle. So, I think that it could potentially provide some meaning for suffering. And if there's meaning in suffering, is it still suffering? Yes. But I think that is an angle or a perspective that could potentially provide some comfort and some meaning to the pain. Like I said, when we started, this is a very heavy issue. Typically, when you talk about this, there's a few things you don't want to bring up, and that's one of them is small children, because how could you even try to say, such suffering? But I think the perspectives that we find in the Talmud and kind of the nuances between Rabbi Akiva and Moses kind of deliberating with this issue, I think it does show us that this is an important issue, and it's an issue that's not easily understood, and there's a lot of subtleties to it. Moses was asked that question, he didn't get an answer, and God tells him, this is not for you. And if we find that our attempts to try to find some sort of equilibrium in this issue are not being fulfilled, we could say we're like Moses. We also have a hard time, and that's okay.
I have one question.
Yes.
In regard to the glowing of
Yes.
the
Yes.
Is that which got this?
Yes. It says ki karan or panav. That's what the verse says. It says karan or panav. People want to look at him because karan or panav. The word karan means not koran. Karan could if the kuf reish nun could mean a horn. Karen it means a horn. Karan means it illuminated. That's where it came from. That's exactly where it came from. Jews have horns.
As a matter of fact, when I was living as a young child in Fort Worth, in our apartment complex, my mom made friends with our neighbor, who's from East Texas. And during, of course, the conversation over coffee, my mother happened to explain that she was Jewish. The woman stepped back and looked.
Where are the horns?
Where are your horns? And she was very, very honest about it.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Yes, I appreciate that.
Everybody heard the fishermen's next month. The fishermen's. Can I make an announcement?
No.